Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director here at Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. Joining me is Bishop Robert Barron, and I know, Bishop, a couple episodes ago you said we need to cool it on the hey greetings, like hey Bishop.
Yeah, no, I never thought of that till this person said, hey, I just said it there. Why this trendy use of hey? And I thought, well, I guess it's trendy. Yeah, so I won't say hey anymore. I'll just say, hello, Brandon.
I'll bow and formally greet you as Your Excellency. Hey, before we begin here,
hey,
before we begin here, I like to ask this every now and then. I don't think I've asked you in a while, but what books are you reading? I know a lot of people love to hear any good things you're reading right now.
Well, I don't know if I qualify as good. I am reading that book about the Vatican and homosexuality and all this. It just came out a short time ago. And not that I'm savoring it, and I don't think it's a very good book, but I am reading it because I feel it's important to get through. Let's see, what else am I reading more technically? I'm reading the Churchill biography more for fun. You know, this wonderful 1,000-page new biography of Winston Churchill. What am I reading theologically? I know. It's this new study of Karl Wojtyła's personalism and the study of the acting person, his book. So I just started that. And then I just ordered, you got it for me, the Eleanor Stump's new book on atonement. So that's coming soon. So those are some of the things I'm working at.
Well, this episode we're going to devote to the future of the Word on Fire show, this show, the podcast.
Okay.
What originally began as just an audio podcast now kind of has morphed into both audio and video. But I want to go all the way back first to the early days of Word on Fire. I'm talking 10, 15 years ago. One of the first things that you sought out to do was to get your homilies on the radio. Share that story with us.
That's how it really started, is I kind of reached for the old tech, I suppose. I thought, we should do something with media and try to get this out more broadly. And so I went to WGN Radio, which is a big radio station in Chicago. And I just asked them, they didn't know who I was, and I had no connection with them. I just said, what would it cost to have a radio or a homily program on WGN? And they said, well, the only time available is 5:15 on Sunday morning, and it would cost you $50,000 for the year. So that's what I found out. And it didn't sound real promising. Whenever I mentioned it, people would just laugh, who's up at 5:15 on Sunday morning. But I went to the parish and I asked for the money, and the people gave it to me. So that's how we started. And that went on for several years with WGN. Same time. I remember the Lutheran hour was after me, and I said, hey, any way I could get the slot at 6 a.m.? No, that's a Lutheran hour. And I guess they had a corner on that. So I then expanded to Relevant Radio, which is a Catholic radio network. So we stopped WGN after maybe it was 3 or 4 years, but that's how I got going.
We still get emails from people who said, I was there right at the beginning. I was listening to those homilies on the radio. But as soon as this whole podcasting revolution came along, it really highlighted the deficiency in some ways of the radio outreach because it requires somebody to be at a specific place at a specific time, right?
Yeah, and I always go back to Fulton Sheen. Now, the advantage of Fulton Sheen was there only were a handful of TV networks available. So if you got on one of those, you had a big audience. But sure, he had to rely on the fact that people at a particular time could tune into the radio or then the television. But now with the explosion of new media, which I think is a providential gift, just as the printing press was, that revolutionized communication technology. So this is, and I think it's a gift from Providence, and we should use it that way, that now you do a podcast like this one, and anyone, anytime they want to, while they're working out, while they're driving, while they're, watching the kids or whatever, they can listen to it. And that opens up enormous possibilities for the gospel. So I love that. And then, of course, all the YouTube business, we were right on the ground floor. I'll say that about YouTube, because I had just heard about it. I believe it was 2006 YouTube started, and we were by 2007 we were doing videos. And so I just right away saw the potential of that as enormous.
You were one of the pioneers on many of these platforms. So, you were on YouTube pretty early, Facebook and Instagram, email, websites, all of those platforms. You built a pretty large following pretty quickly. But I remember after I came on board maybe 5-6 years ago, podcasting seemed to me like the obvious thing that we hadn't get started with. Do you remember when we first started talking about it? What were your early impressions of podcasting? Had you heard of it? Did you know what it was?
I don't think I knew what it was. So all the things you mentioned, I always kind of smile when I'm described as a pioneer in these areas. I mean, I guess I understood once people explained to me, oh yeah, that's a good thing to do, but not like I was leading the way. I barely knew what these things were. And then people would say, hey, this might be a good, avenue. So podcasting was like that. I didn't know what a podcast was. I didn't know what a website was when we first got going years and years ago. And someone said, why don't we get a website for the homilies? And I said, well, I don't know. What is that exactly, a website? Because remember, this is when the web was just getting going, in late 90s, right? It was just, when did the internet sort of, what's the formal beginning date for the internet?
Yeah. I
what
mean,
do they say? Mid 90s or something?
Roots like in the 70s and 80s, but it took off individually among normal people in the 90s.
Like the 90s, right? So we're talking maybe 1996 or 7. And I said, oh gosh, okay, website, I guess, And then I remember being thrilled when we had a few hundred people listening or watching. I thought, hey, that's pretty good. We got 200 people. So at each stage, I had people like you who understood these possibilities. And I guess if I contributed, it was simply to say like, okay, let's try that. But I do think it's a time for healthy experimentation, that the church ought to be in these worlds. With all their negativity. I mean, believe me, everyone and his brother and sister remind me all the time of, how bad the social media world is and how many terrible things are on it, which I completely get, just as there are terrible things in movies, terrible things on television, terrible things are said over telephones. It doesn't mean we repudiate these technologies, rather we try to sanctify them.
I remember very colorfully when we first recorded the very first episode, because it was the day after you were consecrated a bishop. So you were made bishop in the Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral there in Los Angeles. And the next day we were in your little room there, and we sat down with a couple of microphones. The topic we picked was Pope Francis.
What was it?
It was Pope Francis and his 4 American heroes. Remember, it was right after Pope Francis had come to America. And I remember even me, who had researched the whole podcasting world pretty extensively, I wasn't sure if this thing was really going to work or take off, or if the quality was good enough. But man, here's some of the stats here over the last 3.5 years. So that was back in this. It aired finally in December of 2015. So just about 3 years ago. Since then, we have 170 episodes, which
it's amazing to me. Yeah,
this strikes me that if each episode's about half an hour, that means you and I have talked for like 85 hours. About
seriously, that statistic confounds me. It amazes me to think that we've had that many conversations. 170.
These episodes have been downloaded over 6 million times, 6 million downloads of these episodes, which I think is faster growth than we saw on YouTube, Facebook, any of these other platforms. The podcasting world is just exploding. The show now airs on several radio stations. When it debuted, it was the number 3 religion and spirituality podcast on all of iTunes. Right now, it's kind of hovering around either the number 1 or the number 2 Catholic podcast in the world right now. And then just
is that right? I didn't realize.
There's a growing number of Catholic podcasts, which on a side note, I'm very happy to see that there's a lot of other Catholics taking advantage of this medium. We're getting about 40,000 audio downloads per episode and another 30 to 40,000 video views per episode. So about 80,000 people are watching these conversations, which I think I've reminded you a couple times. It's like a Billy Graham crusade every single week. I mean, just to think about how excited Fulton Sheen or Billy Graham would have been to do
have
something
this kind
like
of technology.
And then,
no, absolutely.
Say something about this, Bishop. I know whenever you travel the country to different conferences or events, you always come back telling me, I heard from so many people who say the daily gospel reflections that they get via email, and then the podcast. That's what everyone's talking about.
Those are the two. And people still talk about the sermons and YouTube videos, but those two things, the daily gospel, which is very simple. It's someone on our team finds a passage from a sermon I've given on that given gospel. Some people wonder, am I up at 2 a.m, writing these things every day? And I say, well, no, they are my words indeed. No one's writing them for me, but they're culled from homilies I've given over the years. But people love the daily thing, even though, like, I'll read it sometimes and think like, okay, it's kind of a simple, idea, but okay, it's helpful to people. And then the second thing is the podcast. And that has convinced me, even independent of any objective data you might give me, that convinces me of how important it is. I think, Brandon, it's a very user-friendly, it's a conversational form. So you and I are talking and people are just kind of listening in, like they have a cup of coffee and they're listening in. That's less threatening maybe than, a formal sermon or I'm giving a lecture on something. I think that the chatty conversational quality is a lure.
Well, one of the things we're looking at for the Word on Fire show is to expand it to both enhance the quality of it and to get it in front of more people. And to do that, we'd like to ask you who are listening to this to join us as patrons. You may have heard through other podcasts or video shows about the website Patreon, which is a way that listeners and supporters of creative projects can come and join forces. And we've recently opened up a new Patreon account for this podcast. You can find it at wordonfireshow.com/patron. So if you've enjoyed the show over the years, if you've liked listening to our topics on faith and culture, theology, philosophy, signal your support by joining us, whether it's just $5 a month, $10 a month, however much you can give. We'd love for you to join us on this mission to evangelize the culture. Bishop, one thing I wanted to emphasize, because I've talked to a lot of people who say, man, I'm so glad to see all the things Word on Fire is doing, especially at how the church is supporting Word on Fire by giving them all these resources to film these documentaries and produce these podcasts. But from its very inception, you sort of set up Word on Fire as an independent apostolate. You're not attached to a particular diocese. You don't get money from the church. That's not how the ministry is structured. Why'd you do it that way?
Well, and let me say this too, Brandon, at the outset, is I don't mean that at all rancorously, as though I'm at odds, with the church. When this thing started, Word on Fire, the church was just entering into this very dark period that we're still in, of the sex abuse scandals and all that. So I understood that, the church or dioceses had enormous financial obligations and responsibilities. They weren't likely to say, oh yeah, let me give you several $1 million to get this thing launched. So I understand that. I'm not rancorous about it at all. But also it was Cardinal George, who was our great mentor and who was the grandfather of Word on Fire. He told me right from the beginning, he said, don't get it caught up in the structures of the archdiocese. And again, he's the Archbishop of Chicago. He wasn't against the archdiocese, but he felt it was better for us if we were institutionally and financially independent. And so I've always taken that as my point of departure. And it's true. The church has never given Word on Fire a penny from the beginning, not a penny. All of our support has come from lay people, from the good people of God. I go back to the early days of, the website and all that. It was people at Sacred Heart Parish in Hubbard Woods, Illinois, that gave me the money for that. The Catholicism series, which we needed a lot of money to do because I wanted to do it at a high level, which I think everybody appreciates. But I explained to do that, we need lots of money. That all came from lay people. That all came from the faithful. I went first in Chicago, where I was based, but then I went all over the country, went to Boston, San Francisco, went to Texas, Florida. And I was like a little Franciscan, just begging for money, And I just had my begging bowl out and said, I need money to make this happen. And I used to say, your parents and grandparents gave money for the great Catholic institutions, and thank God for them. But people aren't coming to those anymore. Increasingly, they're walking away from our institutions. So if we want to get them, we need film, TV, radio, podcasts, social media, YouTube, everything else. So I said this Catholicism series I envisioned as a way to reach out. Well, thank God they got it. I think they understood that, and they gave the money I needed. And it's gone from there. Now, we've also relied on product sales. So we sell, our videos and books and so on. Not so that I can buy houses. I don't have a house except the one the church has given me here. But so we can keep the ministry going. It's to keep this alive. And as you say quite rightly, we love the new media, but the new media are expensive. They just are. It's just the way it goes. So we've relied on the people of God, and I like that. I'm very happy about that. That it's a collaborative ministry of clergy and lay people. The fact too that Word on Fire is mostly lay people, right? People like yourself. Father Steve and I are the priests involved, but it's all lay people, and it's lay people that have supported it from the beginning. So grateful for that.
Yeah, I want to emphasize Word on Fire is a 501c3 nonprofit ministry. We're not trying to make money so that we can pad our pockets. We get no money from the institutional church, no money from any other ministries. We don't even run ads on our websites, our videos, our blogs. We don't sell access to our email list or anything. The only way we're able to do what we're able to do is because people who like our work support us. That happened with the Catholicism series. And
Yeah.
again, we're hoping you can help us here with this Word on Fire show. This podcast is free. It will always be free. We'll never charge for it. But as Bishop said, it does require time and money to produce it. We have designers, editors, video and audio producers. We use high-end microphone equipment and lighting. So we've invested a lot of money into this to bring it to you so that it can be free. So if you'd like to help us support this and get it out to more people, again, go to wordonfireshow.com/patron and become a patron of the show. Bishop, I wanted to talk a little bit about that patronage model, not necessarily with this website, but the whole idea of a bunch of individual Catholics or the church patronizing a creative artist or some sort of project or initiative. That seems to be the model of, say, the Renaissance, where it was only through the patronage of Catholics that people like Michelangelo and Raphael were able to create their works of art. Is that the case?
Sure. Still true today, isn't it? And it's a Vatican II vision too, isn't it? It's the collaboration model. We as a church have to do this together. I know a lot of Catholic faithful are really, really concerned, as I am, about the nuns, right? The NONES. They're really concerned about, especially young people leaving the church. This is a way you can help. A very concrete way you can help is to help us do this kind of outreach. You know this, Brandon, even better than I do. The number of young people that respond to the videos, the podcasts, the films, the books, et cetera, and they're brought back to the church because of them. That's why we do it. Whenever you send me one of those, and once in a while you'll send me a especially moving testimony. It makes my day. I mean, that's why we do what we do, period. That's the whole purpose of it. And it's the collaboration of the good people of God that make that possible. If you wonder, what can I do? What can I do? That is something you can do, is help us do the work that reaches out to especially young people.
Yeah, I want to be very clear here. We're not asking you to donate $100,000 or $1 million. If you can, we'd love to hear from you, but
we wouldn't refuse it.
Sure. But this patronage model is based on the idea that if you have a podcast with 40,000 listeners, if even only a small percentage gave $5 a month or $10 a month, we could do a lot of really amazing things. And as a follower of G.K. Chesterton, it also strikes me that this is sort of his model and Pope Leo XIII's model of distributism, where you have a lot of small individual people funding a lot of small projects that they like, rather than just, big people funding big centralized networks of production. I kind of like that about this podcast, that it's sort of independently produced. It's on niche topics, and we've got our own small following of passionate fans.
If we get a little bit of funding, Brandon, the first thing you do is buy me a new chair in this room. The chair this is a room in my house here in Santa Barbara, and this chair I think was built in 1974 is my guess. And every time I move, it makes these funny noises. So I say the first thing we'll do is, can we buy a new chair?
First $20 that somebody donates will go to getting Bishop Barron a new chair.
A better chair for this room. Yeah, I'd like that.
But actually, on that note, let me get a little more specific and tell you what we're hoping to do with this Patron Money. So first of all, I mentioned we recently shifted the podcast to also do video. We'd like to increase the quality of that. So both in-person videos with Bishop Barron and other guests, but also improve the video quality of these sorts of episodes where I interview them across the country. Second, we want to bring on some production assistants who can chop up these video episodes and distribute them through social media. So instead of one 30-minute episode each week, there'd be content coming out each day that are taken from this much longer episode. So that takes time and energy and help to do. And then finally, we want to help promote and spread this episode and get it in front of people who aren't already listening, especially nuns and atheists and agnostics. I've been pleasantly surprised to get emails from a ton of non-Catholic listeners of the show, including not only Protestants and Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters, but there's atheists, there's agnostics, there's fallen away Catholics who find the show intriguing. They kind of stumbled across it on Facebook or on iTunes and gave it a listen, and now they're subscribers. We want to get in front of more of those people. But again, to advertise and promote it to them, it costs money. So these are the sorts of things we hope to do. I hope we're not being too heavy-handed with the requests. But again, if you've enjoyed this show over the past 3 years, 170 episodes, 85 hours, if any of it's helped you at all, please consider going to wordonfireshow.com/patron and become a patron. When you do, we've got some cool stuff for you, including free books, free exclusive episodes, the chance to have Q&As with Bishop Barron only for our patrons. We're even going to solicit feedback and suggestions for future episode topics. So if you want to be a closer tied supporter of the show, become a patron. Again, the website is wordonfireshow.com/patron. All right, that sound means it is time for a question from one of our listeners. Bishop, today we have a question from Maggie. She's wondering how to talk to people who left the church because they think the church is anti-biblical in some way. So here's Maggie's question.
Okay.
Hello, Bishop Barron. I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you do. My question today is regarding people who claim to have left the Catholic faith because of its inconsistencies with what the Bible says. What is the best way to go about learning how to evangelize against this? And what would you recommend as a conversation starter in this area? Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And Brandon, something you've talked about. Of course, you as a former Protestant who became a Catholic are aware of this, kind of classic objection. And I think you put great stress, and I agree with you, on the fact that in terms of causality, let's face it, the church comes first. The Bible didn't fall from the heaven, but the Bible fell, if you want, from the church. It came from decisions made by the church. Which books to include, which belong to the canon of Scripture, who compiles the Bible as we know it, but the church. And so the bifurcation of Bible church is just a false one, or as though the Bible has this clear primacy over the church. I think you very persuasively argue au contraire, that if anything, the church has primacy over the Bible. Now, there's a subtle relationship there. I don't want to make that sound aggressive, but I'd say maybe that's a teasing point of departure to say, well, where'd the Bible come from? And it came from the preaching of the original followers of Jesus. So before the Bible was written, let's say the New Testament was written down, you've got, decades of preaching. Well, the preaching took place within the church, if you want to say under the aegis of the church. It was what formed the church, etc. And then in time, the church, meaning its leadership and so on, sifting through this great preaching and sifting through the various texts that were available eventually, said, this is the canon of the New Testament. A key player to look at there is St. Irenaeus, because by the 2nd century, or like the mid to late 2nd century, someone like Irenaeus is one of the first ones to be naming, there's the canon of the New Testament that we recognize to this day. So it's a false dichotomy, and Catholics don't hold to a sola scriptura approach. So we balk at that. And that's a major reason why, because the church has a kind of primacy even over Scripture in that sense. So maybe I'd start there and do it, of course, in a friendly, inviting way, but maybe start there as an argument.
The reason I like that strategy is because it doesn't get you bogged down in the individual doctrine.
Yeah.
Like, where is this thing in the Bible?
Where's purgatory in the Bible? And that sort of thing.
Right.
And you can indeed read someone like Brian Petrie. You can indeed find a lot of scriptural warrant for the more controversial teachings, because there's been a renaissance in Catholic Bible scholarship the last even like 40 years. So look, there are indeed, but I think you're right. Probably that meta question is a more fundamental one.
All right. Well, listen, thanks so much again for listening to this show. Thanks for listening to the last 170 episodes of the Word on Fire show. We are so thankful for you guys for supporting, sharing, listening, downloading these episodes over the last few years. Again, if you want to join us and become a patron, just visit wordonfireshow.com/patron or go to patreon.com and search for Bishop Barron and you'll find it there. We'd love to have you join us as patrons. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.